The officer didn't even look at her when she grabbed his arm. He was leaning against his cruiser, thumbs hooked into his belt, watching the gridlocked intersection like it was something mildly inconvenient happening to someone else. When her fingers closed around his sleeve, this woman in scrubs, hair half pulled loose, face white as chalk, he looked down at her hand first, then at her, the way you look at something you might scrape off your shoe. "My son is in the back seat," she said. "He had surgery 4 days ago and he's crashing. I need you to get me through this traffic, please. I'm a nurse. I know what I'm seeing. He has maybe minutes." "Ma'am," the officer pulled his arm back. Not fast. Slow, deliberate, the way people move when they want you to feel the weight of the gesture. "I don't do personal escorts. Call 911 if it's an emergency." "I did call 911. They said traffic units respond to accidents only. They told me to find a patrol officer." "Then they gave you bad information." He turned back toward the intersection, done with her. "Move your vehicle before I cite you for blocking the median." She stood there another 2 seconds. Her son was in the back seat of a silver Honda Civic 12 feet away, slumped against the window, lips the color of old wax. "Please," she said again. Quieter this time, like the word cost her something. Officer Carl Dutton didn't respond. 11 minutes later, the first military vehicle turned onto Kessler Boulevard, then a second, then a third. By the time the convoy had sealed both ends of the intersection, every phone on that block was already recording, and Carl Dutton was standing exactly where she'd left him, staring at something he could not explain, and beginning to understand in a slow and nauseating way that he had made a catastrophic mistake. Before we go any further, if this story already has you gripping something, follow along, hit like, and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The morning had started the way bad days usually do. Not with a single disaster, but with a series of small things going wrong in ways that don't seem connected until they are. Mara Sutton woke at 5:47 a.m. to the sound of her son coughing. Not the wet, urgent kind of cough that would have pulled her out of bed in a single motion, just the dry, fitful kind that had been following him around since the surgery. She lay still for a moment, counting the seconds between coughs the way she had taught herself to do in the army, where sleep was rationed and panic was a luxury nobody could afford. The coughing stopped. She heard him shift in his bed down the hall, heard the small creak of the mattress as he resettled. She closed her eyes. She did not go back to sleep. By 6:30, she was in the kitchen, making oatmeal she knew her 9-year-old son, Marcus, probably wouldn't eat, and checking the discharge paperwork from Harwell General Hospital for the 4th time since they'd come home. 4 days post-op from an appendectomy that had been more complicated than expected. The appendix had been close to rupturing when they'd finally gotten him into the OR, and the surgical team had spent an extra hour dealing with early-stage peritoneal involvement that the initial scans hadn't clearly shown. The attending surgeon, a precise, unhurried man named Dr. Elroy, had told her the recovery window was 7 to 10 days, that she should watch for fever spiking above 102, for rigidity in the abdomen, for any sign of vomiting that came back after 2 clean days. Marcus had been clean for 3 days. He'd eaten half a bowl of soup the night before. He'd asked her if he could play video games. Mara had told him probably tomorrow. She'd kissed his forehead and felt nothing alarming. Warm, not hot. Normal. She was a nurse. She knew how to assess a child. What she did not know, standing at her kitchen counter with a bowl of oatmeal going cold and the discharge papers spread out in front of her, was that the infection that had taken quiet root 4 days ago in the tissue margin of her son's abdomen was about to stop being quiet. She heard him call for her at 8:14. Not a yell, not crying, just, "Mom." Flat and strange, the way kids sound when something is happening to their body, and they don't have words for it yet. She was at his door in 4 seconds. Marcus was sitting up in bed, and his color was wrong. That was the first thing her brain registered before the clinical part of her caught up. His color was wrong. There was a gray undertone to his face, around his mouth especially, that hadn't been there an hour ago. He was holding his stomach with both hands, not clutching it, just holding it, like he was trying to keep it from doing something. "It hurts different," he said. She sat down next to him, put her hand on his forehead. Hot, legitimately hot, not the mild warmth of an hour ago. She pressed 2 fingers gently against the right lower quadrant of his abdomen, and he flinched hard, grabbed her wrist. "Okay," she said. Calm voice. She had used this voice in Kandahar when a sergeant with a sucking chest wound was watching her face to decide whether he was going to live or die. "Okay, buddy, I need you to breathe out slow for me." He breathed out. She pressed again, slightly higher. He made a sound she didn't like. "Can you stand up?" He tried. Got halfway and stopped, jaw tightening. "Okay, sit back down." She was already reaching for her phone. She called the surgeon's emergency line first, got a recording, left a message, called Harwell General's post-surgical follow-up line, got a nurse who asked her to hold. She held for 90 seconds, watching her son's breathing, watching the small, rapid lift and fall of his chest that was slightly too fast. "Post-surgical follow-up, this is Trish." "Hi, Trish. My name is Mara Sutton. I'm a registered nurse. My son Marcus Sutton had an appendectomy 4 days ago with Dr. Elroy, and I'm looking at what I believe may be developing peritonitis. He has fever, point tenderness at the RLQ, guarding. I need to bring him in right now." A pause. "Okay, so you'll want to come to our urgent care walk-in. He needs the ER." Another pause. "I understand you're worried." "I'm not worried. I'm telling you what I'm seeing clinically. I'm bringing him to the ER. I just want it documented that I called." She hung up. Look, the drive to Harwell General was 8 minutes under normal conditions. This was not normal conditions. Kessler Boulevard, the most direct route, was a parking lot. A water main had burst somewhere near the 4th Street underpass. Mara could see the orange construction signs from 3 blocks back, the line of backed-up vehicles stretching further than she could track. She made 2 turns trying to find an alternate route and hit construction zones on both. The city of Delwood was, as it had been for the past 6 months, in the middle of an infrastructure renovation project that had turned the east side into a slow-motion obstacle course. She checked the GPS. Fastest route, 14 minutes, via surface streets. She looked in the rearview mirror. Marcus was reclined against the back seat, eyes half open, one hand pressed against his stomach. In the 5 minutes since she'd gotten him into the car, his breathing had developed a quality she didn't like. Shallow, slightly irregular, the kind of pattern she associated with a body beginning to redirect resources. 14 minutes was too long. She'd been an Army combat nurse for 6 years, attached to special operations units in 3 different theaters. She had kept men alive in dust and heat and noise with nothing but her hands and whatever she could pull from a field kit. She understood, in a cellular way that had never entirely left her, the difference between time you had and time you didn't. She didn't have 14 minutes. She pulled up beside a Delwood PD cruiser idling at the corner of Kessler and Marchmont. The officer inside was a heavy-set man in his 40s, brown hair, the kind of permanent squint that comes from spending too many years looking at traffic. He was on his phone. Mara put down her window. He didn't look up. She tapped her horn. Once. He looked up, looked at her, expression communicating irritation at the interruption. She leaned out. "I'm sorry. I need your help. My son is in the back seat. He's a post-surgical patient and he's crashing. I need to get to Harwell General and I can't get through this traffic. Can you give us an escort?" The officer, she could see his nameplate from here, Dutton, looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the back seat. Then he looked back at his phone. "Call 911, he said. "I did. They said patrol units handle escorts for—" "Ma'am, I'm handling a call right now." "You're sitting at a red light on your cell phone." The light changed. He pulled forward, widening the gap between them. Mara pulled forward too. She pulled up alongside him at the next block and put her window down again. "Please, I'm not asking you to go out of your way. We're 8 blocks from the hospital. 5 minutes. Just get us through this intersection." "You need to stop following me," Dutton said, not looking at her. "That's my last word on this." She would think about those words later. That's my last word on this. The small, cushioned authority of them. The absolute unconcern. She pulled into the median cut and stopped. Around her, the intersection at Kessler and Draper was gridlocked in all 4 directions. The construction detour had pushed half the city's morning traffic through this single choke point, and it wasn't moving. She could see the light cycle 3 times while she sat there, and each cycle moved maybe 4 cars. She looked back at Marcus. His eyes were closed. That had happened in the last 90 seconds. "Marcus?" She kept her voice level. "Talk to me, buddy." "Tired," he murmured. "I know. Stay awake for me, okay? Tell me something. Tell me about your game." "Which one?" "Anyone. Whichever one you want." He started talking about something involving dragons, his voice slow and loose, and she turned back to the windshield and made a decision. Tucked in her wallet, behind her nursing license and her rarely used AAA card, was a laminated card she had not looked at in over 3 years. It was small, cream-colored, with an embossed seal in the upper left corner. She had been given it at her discharge processing, along with 2 other documents she kept in a fireproof box at home, and a captain with careful eyes had told her, "This activates a priority response protocol for you or any immediate dependent in the event of a life-threatening medical emergency. You will probably never use it, but it exists." She had almost not taken it. It had felt like something theatrical, something they handed out to make soldiers feel valued on their way out the door. She took it out now. There was a number on the back. She dialed it. It rang twice. "Priority medical response line authenticate." Mara read the number from the card. A 3-second pause. "Sutton, Mara, Sergeant First Class, retired. Authentication confirmed. What's your emergency?" Her voice didn't shake. She had trained it not to. "My son, Marcus Sutton, 9 years old, is a post-surgical dependent. Suspected peritonitis developing from appendectomy 4 days ago at Harwell General, Delwood. I'm blocked in traffic at Kessler and Draper intersection, 8 blocks from the hospital. I need emergency medical transport." "Location confirmed. Hold." 7 seconds. "Ma'am, we're activating a PMOP response to your location. ETA approximately 6 minutes. Stay on the line." PMOP, Priority Medical Operations Protocol. She had heard the acronym twice in her 6 years of service and never seen it used. She put the phone on her dashboard and looked at her son. "Marcus, still with me?" "Still here," he said quietly. "Good. Keep talking." Carl Dutton had pulled into a loading zone half a block up Kessler, still on his phone. He was dealing with what he privately thought of as a situation. A conversation with his union rep about a complaint that had been filed against him 2 weeks ago by a woman who claimed he'd been rough with her during a traffic stop. The complaint was, in his assessment, entirely without merit, but it required management, and management required calls like this one, where he had to speak carefully and document that he had been cooperative. He was 3 sentences into explaining why the dashcam footage would exonerate him when he heard the first engine. Military vehicles have a sound that's distinct from civilian traffic in a way that bypasses intellectual recognition and hits something older. A low, heavy, authoritative rumble that occupies a different frequency. Dutton heard it before he saw it, and he looked up instinctively. The lead vehicle was an MRAP, a mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle, olive drab, with military plates and a light bar cycling amber. Behind it came 2 more, flanking, along with a black SUV with federal plates that Dutton's gut recognized before his brain did. They weren't passing through. They were stopping. The MRAP pulled across Kessler Boulevard at Draper, blocking the intersection completely, and the 2 flanking vehicles sealed the cross streets. Personnel in combat utilities dropped from the vehicles, 4 of them, moving with the kind of deliberate efficiency that made civilian onlookers go still on instinct. Dutton got out of his car. The black SUV stopped at the curb beside the silver Honda Civic that had been sitting in the median cut. The rear door opened. A man in a service dress uniform stepped out. The kind of uniform that has a significant quantity of hardware on it, ribbons and insignia arranged in the specific visual language of senior military rank. He walked directly to the Honda Civic. Not to Dutton, not to anyone else on the scene, directly to the woman in the driver's seat. He stood outside her window, and when she lowered it, he rendered a salute, not a casual gesture, a full, formal, held salute. the kind you give to someone whose rank or honor demands it. Dutton stood on the sidewalk and felt something cold settle into his chest. The woman wasn't in uniform. She was wearing scrubs. Her name, Dutton would learn very shortly, was Mara Sutton, and the man in the service dress uniform was Colonel Archie Prentice of the Phoenix Valley Medical Operations Command, which most people in civilian life had never heard of and which existed for a small number of specific and serious purposes. Mara had not known Prentice was the one coming. She had expected a vehicle, a medical team, something logistical. She hadn't expected the salute, and when he held it, she felt something happen in her chest that she couldn't have easily named. Not relief exactly, not emotion exactly, something more like the sensation of a door she had locked a long time ago being opened from the outside. "Sergeant Sutton," Prentice said, "we have a medical team standing by. How is he?" She got out of the car. "Declining. He was conscious a few minutes ago, responsive but slow. I'm watching for septic progression. The fever's elevated, he's guarding. I don't have equipment for more than a visual assessment." "Understood." He turned and made a hand signal, and two medics in combat utilities came forward immediately with a collapsible gurney. Marcus, when they opened the back door, squinted up at the uniforms with the slow, blinking confusion of a sick child. "Mom?" "Right here." She was beside him. "These guys are going to help us, okay? You're going to be fine." She didn't know with certainty that was true, but she said it the way she had learned to say things like that, cleanly, without hesitation, because hesitation was its own kind of damage. The medics worked fast and competently, transferring Marcus onto the gurney with minimum movement and maximum care, checking pupils, pulse, skin temp, asking him questions in calm voices. She watched their hands. They were good. She let herself notice that they were good and let it mean something. A MEDEVAC helicopter was already descending onto Kessler Boulevard, which had been effectively shut down in both directions. The construction of this moment, military vehicles sealing a city intersection, a helicopter landing on a major street, personnel moving in coordinated silence, had pulled every phone on the block out of every pocket. People were standing on the sidewalks recording. A delivery driver had gotten out of his truck. Dutton hadn't moved. Prentice walked over to him. He was not a large man, but he occupied space in the way certain people do, not through physical presence, but through the specific quality of their attention. He looked at Dutton with an expression that was perfectly neutral, which was, in its own way, more uncomfortable than anger. "Are you the officer this woman approached for assistance this morning?" Dutton's mouth felt dry. "She approached me, yes. I advised her to call 911. She had already called 911 before she approached you." "I wasn't aware—" "I understand." Prentice glanced at the phone Dutton was still holding. "I'd put that away." Dutton put his phone in his pocket. "You're going to want to remain available," Prentice said. "There will be questions." He said it the way you say something that is not a threat precisely because it doesn't need to be. He walked back toward the helicopter. Mara rode in the helicopter with Marcus, one hand around his wrist, tracking his pulse while the medic across from her monitored his vitals on a field display. Marcus was semi-conscious, which was better than unconscious, and his color, she thought, was marginally less frightening than it had been 20 minutes ago. Whether that was real or just what she needed to believe, she couldn't be certain. The medic, a young woman with a specialist patch and a brisk, unshowy competence, looked up at Mara and said, "You want to know what I'm seeing?" "Yes." "Tachycardic, temperature 103.4, abdomen's rigid on palpation, but his pressure's holding and he's maintaining his airway. We've got a surgical team standing by at Mercer Military Medical." She paused. "He's sick, but he came to us with time still on the clock. That's because of you." Mara looked at her son. "He's 9. "I know." "He was asking about his video games this morning." The medic nodded. Didn't say anything else. Some things don't improve with words. On Kessler Boulevard, the footage was already spreading. 3 separate recordings shot from 3 different angles had been uploaded to social media in the 15 minutes since the convoy arrived. The highest quality one, taken from a second-floor apartment window directly above the intersection, showed the entire sequence with an unobstructed view. The silver Civic in the median cut, The woman in scrubs at Dutton's window, Dutton pulling away. The same woman returning, leaning out again. Dutton's second dismissal. The woman returning to her car. Then the military vehicles. Then Colonel Prentice stepping out and rendering a formal salute to the woman in scrubs. Then Dutton, standing on the sidewalk, holding his phone, watching the helicopter land. The clip was 2 minutes and 47 seconds long. By the time Marcus Sutton was in pre-op at Mercer Military Medical, it had been viewed 900,000 times. The caption on the most shared version read, "He turned her away." Then the Army showed up to help her. Someone had added in a reply, "Who is she?" Inside the Delwood Police Department, Lieutenant Harris of Internal Affairs had been watching his phone for 20 minutes. He'd received the first forwarded link from a deputy chief who had received it from a city council staffer who had seen it on the news. Harris had watched the clip twice. Then he'd called downstairs to the watch commander. "Where's Dutton?" "Still on scene. They asked him to stay." "Get him back here." Harris looked at his screen. 1.2 million views. And pull his body cam. Pull the dispatch logs from 8 a.m. to current. Everything. What? Dutton drove back to the station in a specific kind of silence. The kind where you keep running back through a conversation, not to find a different way it could have gone, but because your brain is trying to identify the exact moment when you made the decision that is now eating through the floor beneath you. He had been in this building for 11 years. He had been in this precinct for 8. He knew where the bathrooms were and which vending machine jammed and which lieutenant was reasonable and which one wasn't. He had navigated complaints before. He had sat in front of union reps and answered questions and walked out the other side. This felt different. He knew it felt different because of the salute, because of the way Prentice had stood in front of that woman in scrubs and rendered formal military honors while Dutton stood 20 feet away with his phone in his hand and a complaint about someone else's rough traffic stop in his recent call log. He went through dispatch in his head. She had said she'd called 911. He hadn't verified it, hadn't thought to. He told himself that wasn't a failure of procedure, it was a judgment call. He told himself that while he pulled into the precinct lot. He told himself that while he walked up the steps. He stopped telling himself that when he saw Lieutenant Harris waiting in the hallway outside the watch commander's office with a tablet in his hand and an expression that made the back of Dutton's neck go cold. "Dutton," Harris held up the tablet. On the screen was the dispatch log, pulled and time-stamped. 8:09 a.m., a call from Amara Sutton, reporting a pediatric medical emergency, requesting traffic escort assistance. The 911 operator had advised the caller to look for a patrol unit at the Kessler and Marchmont intersection. Kessler and Marchmont, where Dutton had been sitting in his cruiser on his phone. The call had been logged and tagged as a verified pediatric emergency at 8:11 a.m. Dutton had pulled away from Kessler and Marchmont at 8:12. "You want to talk to me about your morning?" Harris said. Dutton looked at the timestamp, then at the hallway, then at the window at the end of the hallway, through which he could see the parking lot where his cruiser sat, and beyond it, the street. And beyond that, a city that currently had 2 million people watching a clip of him on their phones. He said, "I need to call my union rep." Harris nodded slowly. That would probably be a good idea. Down the hall, someone's phone chimed. Then another. Then Harris's own phone lit up on his belt. He glanced at it. His face did something that wasn't quite an expression. He looked back at Dutton. "Your body cam," he said quietly. It was on. And that was the moment. Not the convoy, not the salute, not the footage already circulating across 20 states. That was the moment Carl Dutton finally understood that nothing about the next days of his life was going to resemble anything that had come before. The body cam footage ran 4 minutes and 19 seconds. Harris had watched it 3 times before Dutton walked through the door, and each time he watched it, something in his chest did a slow, unpleasant tightening. It wasn't that the footage was dramatic. It was almost worse than that. It was ordinary. It was a man doing exactly what he felt like doing, unhurried, unchallenged. In the middle of a morning he expected to be forgotten. You could see the woman, Mara Sutton, in the lower right corner of the frame when she first approached. Scrubs, hair coming loose on one side. The way she moved had a quality to it, not frantic exactly, but compressed, the way people move when they are managing something large and keeping it below the surface. She said something. The camera's audio picked it up clearly. My son is in the back seat. He had surgery 4 days ago and he's crashing. Dutton's response, also clear. Call 911. Then he'd pulled forward. The second approach, she'd followed him a full block, pulled alongside him at the next light, was worse. Because by then you could see at the edge of the frame the back window of the silver Civic. And in the back window, slumped against the glass, was the silhouette of a child. Harris set the tablet face down on his desk and looked at Dutton, who was sitting in the chair across from him with his arms on his knees and the specific posture of a man who has decided that stillness is his best available strategy. "Carl," Harris said. Not Lieutenant, not Dutton. "Carl." "The audio's clean. Both interactions." Dutton said nothing. "She told you he'd had surgery. She told you he was crashing. She told you she'd already called 911. I had no way to verify. She was in scrubs." Harris picked up a printed sheet, the dispatch log, already annotated by his assistant. The 911 call came in at 8:09. Pediatric medical emergency, post-surgical distress. Caller identified herself as an RN. The operator confirmed the emergency classification and directed her to find a patrol unit at Kessler and Marchmont. He set the sheet on the desk facing Dutton. "You were at Kessler and Marchmont at 8:12. Dutton looked at the paper. His jaw moved slightly, like he was working through something, and then stopped. "What were you on the phone about?" Harris asked. A pause. "Union matter. The Delacroix complaint." Dutton looked up. "That has nothing to do with—" "I'm not saying it does. I'm asking what you were on the phone about when a woman in scrubs told you her child was dying, and you told her to move her vehicle before you cited her." Harris let that sentence sit in the room for a moment. "I need to know the full picture, Carl. All of it. Because what I have right now is going to be on the 6 o'clock news in 4 different states, and I need to know if there's anything underneath it that I'm about to be surprised by." The silence that followed had a texture to it. Dutton was a man who had spent 11 years learning how to occupy silence without filling it, one of the actual skills the job gave you if you stayed long enough. But this silence was different. This one had weight pressing into it from the outside. "The Delacroix complaint isn't the only one," Dutton said finally. Harris waited. "There were 2 others last year. Dawkins handled them both." He said a name. Lieutenant Roy Dawkins, currently head of the precinct's Community Liaison Division and Harris's direct counterpart on the west side of the building. "They didn't go anywhere." "Why didn't they go anywhere?" Dutton looked at the wall. "You'd have to ask Dawkins." Harris looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and made a call that, within 40 minutes, would land on the desk of the department's deputy chief, and within 2 hours after that, on the desk of someone in the state attorney's office who had been waiting for exactly this kind of thread to pull. At Mercer Military Medical Center, Marcus Sutton was in surgery. Mara had been told this with clinical directness by a surgeon named Dr. Haddad, who had short gray hair and the kind of eye contact that told you she was giving you the actual information rather than a managed version of it. "Peritonitis, as you suspected. We've got a wash and repair situation. The infection is contained, but we need to get in there. He's stable going in, his pressure's holding. We're looking at 2 to 3 hours. Mara had nodded. She'd asked 2 questions about the specific irrigation approach and whether they were doing a drain placement. And Haddad had answered them without condescension, which Mara noted the way you note small, unexpected kindnesses when you're running on empty. Then she'd sat down in the waiting area and done absolutely nothing for 4 minutes, which was the closest she was going to come to falling apart. The waiting area was quiet, military spare, with chairs that were more functional than comfortable. A corporal at the front desk had brought her a cup of coffee without being asked, and she held it in both hands without drinking it and stared at the middle distance and let her brain, for just those 4 minutes, stop doing the work of being competent. Her son was 9. He liked a video game she didn't entirely understand and ate cereal dry without milk because he said milk made it soggy, and she had stopped arguing about it 8 months ago. He had learned to ride a bike in the parking lot of their apartment complex and fallen twice and gotten up both times without crying, which had made her proud in a way that she'd kept to herself because he was already embarrassed enough. He was 9 and he was in surgery, and she had almost not gotten him here. She pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment. Then she picked up her phone. Colonel Prentice had left her a number. She called it, and he answered on the second ring. "How's he doing?" No preamble. She appreciated that. "Surgery, 2 to 3 hours. Dr. Haddad says stable going in." "Haddad's excellent. If she's handling it, he's in good hands." Mara believed him. She didn't know why exactly, except that Prentice had the specific quality of someone who didn't say things to make you feel better. He said things because they were true and let them do whatever work they were going to do. "The footage," she said. A brief pause. "Yes." "How bad is it?" "It's significant. I won't minimize it. The intersection footage combined with your body cam documentation from the 911 log. There's a clear record." He paused again. "Sergeant Sutton, I need to tell you something. The response this morning wasn't only about Marcus." She waited. "When your priority code activated, our system flagged your service record automatically. Standard protocol. But what came back flagged our duty officer, who flagged me." He seemed to choose his next words carefully. "You're on a short list. PMOP maintains a register of former Special Operations medical personnel with a certain classification of field service. Your record includes 3 separate combat citations that were never publicly processed because of the operational security context of the units you were attached to. You were aware of this." "I was aware." "What you may not have known is that one of those citations, the Korengal Incident 2019, was internally recommended for elevation to the Soldier's Medal. It was blocked at the time because of classification concerns. That review was reopened 8 months ago." Another pause. "This morning's events are going to accelerate a number of things. I want you to be prepared for that." Mara stared at the middle distance. "My son is in surgery." "I know, and that is right now the only thing that matters. I'm telling you the rest so it doesn't blindside you." His voice was steady. "You've spent a long time not being seen, Sergeant. That's changing. I wanted you to hear it from someone who knows the full picture first." She didn't say anything for a moment. Outside the waiting room windows, she could see a section of the base's main thoroughfare, orderly and quiet in the morning light. "Thank you, Colonel," she said. "We'll talk more when Marcus is out." He said it with the certainty of someone who doesn't offer reassurances he isn't confident in. "He's going to be okay, Mara." She hung up, looked at the cold coffee in her hands, drank half of it. The name Mara Sutton hit the national news cycle at 11:47 a.m. It didn't come from the police department or the military. It came from the apartment above the intersection, specifically from the woman who had taken the 2-minute 47-second video and who, when a journalist from a regional news aggregator reached out to her via the platform where she'd posted it, had said yes to an interview and provided, along with the original high-resolution footage, a detail she'd mentioned only in passing in her initial post. The soldier who saluted her, I looked it up. That's the Phoenix Valley Medical Operations Command patch on his uniform. That's not something they send out for nothing. A journalist named Petra Wills, who covered military affairs for a mid-sized national outlet and who had more than once broken stories that other people had dismissed as bureaucratic noise, saw that detail at 11:23 a.m. and made 4 phone calls in the following 20 minutes. By 11:47, she had enough to run a preliminary piece with a headline that was, by the standards of military coverage, unusually direct. Army activates priority emergency protocol for former combat nurse. After police deny escort. Who is Mara Sutton? The answer to that question, as Petra Wills began to unpack it over the following hours, was considerably more complicated than a nurse in scrubs on a gridlocked street. The service record she was able to partially access through public military databases, the classified sections were blank, redacted with the specific thoroughness that indicated something real rather than bureaucratic habit, showed 6 years of active duty, 3 overseas deployments, and a discharge classification that included a phrase Wills had only seen in records of personnel attached to Tier 1 or Tier 2 Special Operations units. Exceptional performance under direct hostile action. That phrase, in the context of a medical officer, meant something specific to anyone who knew the nomenclature. It meant she hadn't been treating people in a base hospital. It meant she had been somewhere she wasn't supposed to be, doing something that required a phrase like that to describe without saying what it actually was. Wills published a follow-up at 2:15 p.m. By 3 o'clock, it had been picked up by 7 national outlets. By 4 o'clock, someone in the Department of Defense Public Affairs Office had issued a statement that was careful to neither confirm nor deny specific operational details, while making absolutely clear in the precise diplomatic language that press offices use when they want to communicate something without technically saying it, that Mara Sutton's military service had been of the kind that warranted the response her emergency had received. The statement did not mention Carl Dutton by name. It didn't need to. Dutton had been in the Internal Affairs interview room for 2 hours when his union rep, a man named Gerald Foss, who had been doing this for 23 years and who prided himself on having seen everything, said something he almost never said. "Carl, I need you to stop talking." Dutton stopped. Foss set down his pen. He had been taking notes on a legal pad, and the notes were not going in a direction he liked. The problem with the body cam footage wasn't just what it showed. It was what it corroborated. Every detail of Mara Sutton's account, which had been given to a Petra Wills by phone from the waiting room of a military medical center, matched the audio and visual record from Dutton's own camera. There was no gap in the story. There was no version of events that could be usefully presented as alternative. "The prior complaints," Foss said quietly. "How buried are they?" Dawkins handled them. "That's not what I asked." Dutton looked at the table. "One of them had video, cell phone footage. Woman said I grabbed her arm during a stop. Dawkins flagged it as inconclusive." Foss wrote something down. "Is it inconclusive?" A long pause. "No," Dutton said. Foss capped his pen. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his notes, doing the calculation that Gerald Foss had learned to do in year 2 of this job. Not the calculation about innocence or guilt, because that calculation usually resolved itself, but the calculation about trajectory, about where a thing was going and how fast and whether there was any road between here and there that didn't end in the same place. "Here's what I think is happening," Foss said carefully. "I think this morning cracked something open, and I think whatever was underneath it has been waiting a while." He looked up. "I can help you with the procedural elements. That's my job, and I'll do it. But Carl, there are things I can't help you with if they're worse than what I'm looking at right now. So I need you to be completely honest with me about what's underneath the Dawkins complaints. Both of them." Dutton was quiet for a long time. Outside the interview room, Harris was on his phone again. The deputy chief had called, then the city's legal counsel. Then, at 4:42 p.m., a number that Harris hadn't seen in his contacts before. An investigator from the state attorney's office. A woman with a flat business-like voice who asked Harris to make sure all relevant documentation from the past 3 years of Dutton's service record was preserved and accessible. "We're opening a review," she said. "We'll need everything." Harris said he understood. He stood at the window after the call ended, watching the parking lot go gray in the late afternoon light, thinking about Roy Dawkins and the complaints that hadn't gone anywhere, and the video that had been flagged inconclusive, and the specific shape of a problem that turns out, when you finally look at it from the right angle, to have been visible all along. At 5:08 p.m., his phone lit up with a text from the deputy chief. "State AG just called. They're not waiting on us. Full independent investigation. Effective immediately. Lock it down." Harris read the message twice. Then he walked down the hall toward Dawkins' office, where the light under the door told him Dawkins was still at his desk, and where whatever conversation was about to happen was going to be, by any measure, a very long time coming. He knocked once, didn't wait for an answer. Inside, Dawkins looked up from his computer. Something moved across his face when he saw Harris's expression. Not surprise exactly, but the specific look of a man who has been waiting for a knock he knew was eventually going to come. Harris closed the door behind him. "Roy," he said, "we need to talk about Carl Dutton, and I need you to understand before we start that I already know about the complaints. Both of them. And I already know about the video." Dawkins set down his pen very carefully. "And I need to know," Harris continued, "who else knew, because the state attorney's office is going to ask me that question in approximately 48 hours, and I would strongly prefer to have an answer that doesn't make this department look like it's been running a protection operation for 11 years. Dawkins looked at the desk, the pen he'd set down, the small, neat stack of folders beside his monitor. He opened his mouth, and his phone rang. not his cell. The desk phone, the direct line, the one that only rang when it was coming from upstairs. He looked at it. Harris looked at it. Neither of them moved for one full ring. Then Dawkins reached out and picked it up. "Dawkins." A pause. Something shifted in his face. "Yes, sir." Another pause, longer. "I understand." His eyes went to Harris. "He's here now, actually." "Yes." He held the phone out. "It's the chief." Harris took the receiver. "Lieutenant," the chief said. His voice had the particular flatness of someone delivering information they've already processed and set aside. "I just got off the phone with the state AG. They've identified a second officer whose name appears in the prior complaints alongside Dutton's. They're expanding the scope." A pause. "Is Dawkins in the room with you?" "Yes." "Tell him not to go anywhere tonight." The line went quiet. Harris set down the receiver. He looked at Dawkins, who was looking at the desk again with an expression that had shifted, in the course of that phone call, from calculated stillness into something that had no calculation left in it at all. "Roy," Harris said. Dawkins looked up. "Don't go anywhere tonight." Dawkins didn't leave. Not because Harris had told him not to, because somewhere in the 40 minutes between that phone call and the moment two investigators from the state attorney's office walked through the precinct's front door, Roy Dawkins had made the specific calculation that a man makes when he finally accepts that the architecture he has spent years building around himself has developed a crack he cannot repair from the inside. He was still at his desk when they came for him. Harris watched from the hallway. He wasn't proud of the feeling he had watching it. It wasn't satisfaction. It was closer to the particular exhaustion that comes from understanding that something should have happened a long time ago and didn't, and that the delay had a cost that other people paid. Mara Sutton had paid part of it on a gridlocked street at 8:12 in the morning. A woman named Delacroix had paid part of it at a traffic stop 14 months ago. There were probably others Harris didn't know about yet, and the state attorney's office would spend the next several weeks finding out exactly how many. The investigators were professional and unhurried. They didn't cuff Dawkins in the building. That would come later, after processing, after the formal charges were filed. What they did was ask him to come with them, and Dawkins stood up, straightened his jacket in a motion that seemed purely automatic, and went. He didn't look at Harris on the way out. Harris stood in the empty hallway for a moment after they were gone, then went back to his office and sat down, and didn't do anything for about 90 seconds. Then he pulled up the complete service file on Carl Dutton, not the version that had been processed through Dawkins' division, but the raw version, pulled directly from HR, and started reading it from the beginning. At Mercer Military Medical Center, Marcus Sutton came out of surgery at 6:19 p.m. Dr. Haddad found Mara in the waiting room, still in the same chair, still holding a coffee cup that had been refilled twice and drunk halfway both times. Haddad sat down across from her rather than standing, which Mara registered before the words started. "He did well," Haddad said. "The peritonitis was localized. We didn't find any free perforation, which is the scenario we were most concerned about. We irrigated, placed a drain, closed clean. His vitals are strong through recovery." She paused. "He's going to need 5 to 7 days here, then a careful discharge. But the damage is contained. You got him here in time." Mara looked at her hands. "Barely." "Barely counts," Haddad said simply. "In this work, barely is the same as completely." Mara nodded. Her throat was doing something she was actively managing. She asked 3 more clinical questions. Drain output expectations, antibiotic protocol, fever parameters for concern, and Haddad answered all of them with the directness of someone speaking to a colleague, which was, again, a small kindness that Mara noted and filed. When Haddad left, Mara sat for another moment. Then she pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed out slowly. Her phone had 47 notifications. She hadn't looked at it in 3 hours. She looked at it now. The texts from her sister were first, 4 of them, escalating in urgency from, "Hey, saw something online. Are you okay tomorrow? Call me right now." Below those were a string of notifications from platforms she barely used, her name appearing in context she hadn't anticipated. Below those was a voicemail from a number she didn't recognize with a 202 area code. Washington, D.C. She listened to it. The voice was a woman's, calm, formal, identifying herself as a major in the Army Public Affairs Office. The message was short. There were developments regarding Mara's service record and a review process that had been pending. The major would like to speak with Mara at her earliest convenience. The tone of the message was the specific tone of someone delivering news that is significant, but that they have been instructed to deliver without inflection. Mara deleted 3 of the platform notifications and called her sister. Colonel Prentice arrived at Mercer at 7:45 p.m. with a civilian in tow, a woman named Audra Lyle, introduced simply as a legal liaison from the DoD, which could mean several things, and in this context probably meant something specific that Audra Lyle was not going to specify unless asked directly. They met Mara in a small conference room off the surgical wing. Prentice had brought actual food, a sandwich from somewhere wrapped in paper, and set it in front of her without comment, which was the right move. Mara ate half of it while they talked. "The Public Affairs Office called me," she said. "I know. I asked them to." Prentice folded his hands on the table. "I wanted to talk to you directly before the formal process started. Some of what I'm about to tell you is going to be a lot to absorb in one conversation, and I'd rather you hear it here first than in a conference room with people you don't know." Mara set down the sandwich. "Then tell me." The Soldier's Medal recommendation from 2019 has been formally reactivated. The declassification review on the Koringal operation concluded 3 weeks ago. The timeline of that is coincidental, not connected to today. But the effect is that the operational record that's been sealed since your discharge is now partially accessible to the relevant review boards. He paused. The medal recommendation is being elevated. I don't know the exact timeline yet, but it's moving. Mara was quiet. "There's more," he said. She looked at him. "The footage from this morning, the intersection video, the body cam audio, it's been seen by people in places that don't usually pay attention to local police misconduct stories. The combination of what happened on that street and what's in your service record is generating a conversation at levels that are going to produce very public outcomes." He chose his words deliberately. "You're going to be asked to speak, publicly, in formats that reach a significant audience. The department's public affairs office can help you manage that, but I won't pretend you'll be able to opt out entirely." Mara looked at the table. "I'm a nurse. I don't want to be a story." "I know." He said it without apology. "But Marcus needed help this morning, and a man in a uniform decided it wasn't worth his time, and 14 million people watched it. That's not something that gets put back in a box." 14 million. She hadn't looked at the numbers. Audra Lyle, who had been quiet, spoke for the first time. "Sergeant Sutton, my role here is to help ensure that whatever becomes public about your service record is released in a way that you have some control over. There are classified elements that will remain classified regardless of what happens. That's not negotiable. But the portions that are declassifiable, the portions that speak to what you did and why the military responded the way it did this morning, those are your story to tell, if you choose to tell it." Mara looked at her. "And if I don't choose to? Then we manage it as best we can from our end. But it'll be less accurate. Other people will fill the gaps." A silence settled. Marcus was 2 floors above them in a recovery room, drainage tube in place, vitals stable, probably dreaming the slow chemical dreams of post-anesthesia. The thing that mattered most was already resolved. Everything else was the aftermath, and aftermaths had their own gravity. "I need to see my son first," Mara said. "Of course," Prentice said, "and then I'll think about the rest." He nodded. And then, because he was a man who understood timing, he changed the subject entirely, asked her about the surgical team, asked whether Haddad had been the attending, and let the larger conversation rest while Mara finished the second half of the sandwich. She hadn't realized she'd picked back up. At the Delwood Police Department, the night shift arrived into a building that felt like it had been physically altered by the day's events. The chairs were in the same place, the coffee machine was still broken in the same specific way, the same flickering fluorescent tube in the third-floor hallway had still not been replaced. But something had shifted in the air, the way it shifts in a building when something official and irreversible has been set in motion. Dutton had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation at 5:30 p.m. He turned in his badge and his weapon to a watch commander who'd accepted them without eye contact, which told Dutton more about the current temperature of the room than anything that had been said to him directly. The story, by that point, had been on 3 national broadcasts. The version that was gaining the most traction was not the version Dutton would have chosen. The body cam footage had been obtained, through what channel was still being debated internally, though Harris had his suspicions, and was now circulating with the 911 dispatch audio overlaid, synced to the timeline, so that you could hear the operator's classification of the call as a verified pediatric medical emergency while watching Dutton tell a woman to move her vehicle before he sighted her. The overlay wasn't editorially neutral. Someone had made choices about what to emphasize, but the facts underneath the choices were inert and unchangeable, and that was the part that mattered. Harris stayed late. He was going through Dutton's complete file, cross-referencing the dates of the 2 suppressed complaints against the duty rosters and the shift supervision logs, building the picture that the state attorney's office was going to need. It was painstaking work, the kind that required patience and a tolerance for the specific frustration of finding things that should have been found a long time ago. Names kept appearing in the supervision logs that Harris recognized. Small decisions that looked bureaucratic in isolation, a report filed with the wrong classification, a complaint logged under the wrong category, that formed a different shape when you laid them out in sequence. He was 3 hours into it when his phone buzzed with a text from the deputy chief. A G confirmed second officer identified. Charges being prepared. Press conference tomorrow 10 a.m. You're on the list. Harris set his phone down, looked at the files spread across his desk. He'd been in internal affairs for 9 years. He'd seen misconduct covered, ignored, minimized, and occasionally prosecuted. And he had developed, over those 9 years, a reasonably accurate internal instrument for measuring the difference between a case that would result in meaningful change and a case that would result in a press conference and then return to business as usual. This one felt different. He didn't entirely trust that feeling. He'd been wrong before, but the specific combination of elements here, the military involvement, the declassifying service record, the 14 million view footage, the state AG moving within hours instead of months, this had a different center of gravity than anything he'd worked before. He texted back, confirmed. I'll be there. Then he turned back to the files. Mara sat with Marcus for 2 hours. He woke up 40 minutes after she arrived, slow, confused, the kind of waking up that comes from the deep sediment of general anesthesia. He looked at her and said, "Are we at the hospital?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "The one with the soldiers?" And she said, "Yes, that one." And he accepted this with the practical unconcern of a 9-year-old for whom soldiers at a hospital was simply the latest in a series of unusual events in an unusual day. He asked for water. She got it. He asked what had happened to him, and she told him the simplified version. The infection had gotten worse. The doctors fixed it. He was going to be fine, but needed to rest. He absorbed this, drank more water, and then said with the conversational pivot that children make without apparent effort, "Can I still go to Declan's birthday thing on Saturday?" "We'll see," Mara said. "That means no." "It means we'll see." He made a face and went back to sleep, and Mara sat in the chair beside his bed and looked at him for a long time. The drainage tube, the IV line, the slow, steady number on the monitor that meant his heart was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. She thought about the card in her wallet, the cream-colored card she had carried for 3 years without thinking much about it, without thinking she'd ever use it, without thinking it represented anything real rather than bureaucratic. She thought about the captain who had handed it to her at discharge processing, a captain whose name she could no longer remember, who had said, "You will probably never use it," in a tone that had struck her at the time as dismissive. She had used it. It had worked. She thought about what that meant and couldn't quite complete the thought, because the thing it kept arriving at was something she'd spent 3 years carefully not arriving at. The idea that the people she'd worked alongside, the people she'd kept alive in places she couldn't name, had not simply forgotten her. That the structure she'd operated inside had maintained something on her behalf, quietly, for 3 years, without her knowledge. She didn't know what to do with that. She put it away for later and stayed with her son. At 9:15, a night shift nurse named Brennan came in to check vitals. She was in her 30s, efficient, with a kind of steady warmth that wasn't performed. She checked the drain output, checked the IV rate, made a small adjustment to the flow that Mara tracked, and agreed with. "You're a nurse," Brennan said. Not a question. "E.R. Harwell General." Brennan nodded toward the drain. "You got him here fast enough." "Almost didn't." Brennan looked at her. "I saw the footage. Earlier today. I didn't—" She paused. "I didn't know it was you until just now. The scrubs are the same." Mara looked down at her scrubs. She'd been wearing them for 15 hours. "I'm sorry that happened," Brennan said. Simple, direct. Not performing outrage or comfort, just saying the thing that was true. "He's okay," Mara said. "That's the part that matters." Brennan finished her notes and left. Mara looked at Marcus again. His face in sleep had the particular smoothness of children, the specific absence of whatever adults carry in the muscles around their eyes and mouth even when they're resting. He looked young. He was young. He was 9. She thought about Carl Dutton sitting in an interview room, about Roy Dawkins not going anywhere, about a state AG who had called the deputy chief within hours, about Petra Wills and her headline, "Who is Mara Sutton?" and the 14 million people who had apparently decided the answer to that question was worth their attention. She thought about the major's voicemail, the formal, inflectionless tone, developments regarding your service record and a review process that has been pending. She took out her phone and listened to it again. Then she sat with it for a moment. Then she dialed the 202 number. It was 9:30 at night. She did not expect an answer. The major picked up on the second ring. "Sergeant Sutton." No surprise, like she'd been waiting. "Thank you for calling back." "You said there were developments." "Yes." The major's voice was measured, the pace of someone reading from notes or from a document she'd prepared. "Effective this afternoon, the Army has formally submitted the elevation paperwork for your soldier's medal recommendation. The Secretary of the Army has been briefed. Pending standard review, we're looking at a public ceremony within 60 days. Mara said nothing. "Additionally," the major continued, "the partial declassification of your Korengal service record creates a pathway for the Army to formally acknowledge your operational contributions in a public context for the first time. The specific details of the operations remain classified, but the nature of your role, the citations, the medical outcomes, those can now be discussed." Still nothing from Mara. "Sergeant Sutton, I'm here. I realize this is a significant amount of information." "It is." She looked at Marcus, at the steady line on the monitor. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "The men I served with, the ones I treated." She stopped, started again. "Some of them didn't make it back, some of them did. The ones who did, do they know any of this is happening?" A brief pause. The major's voice, when she answered, had something in it that hadn't been there before. Not quite warmth. The format didn't allow for warmth, but something adjacent. "Several of them have already reached out through official channels. Yes, they're aware." Mara looked at the window. Outside was the dark and the base lights and nothing she could see clearly. "Okay," she said. "I'll be in touch about the ceremony." She hung up. Sat with the quiet for a moment, then she put her phone face down on her knee and pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth and let herself feel for about 45 seconds something she did not have a name for that was made of equal parts grief and relief and a complex, unresolved gratitude that she was going to need a great deal more time to work through. Then she straightened up, checked Marcus's monitor, wrote down the drain output number she'd mentally noted when Brennan checked it, calculated where it should be in 4 hours. Nurse brain. It never fully turned off. She'd stopped fighting that years ago. The press conference the next morning was supposed to be at 10. It moved to 9:40 when the state AG's office received, at 9:17 a.m., a document that nobody in that building had been expecting. It was a letter. Formal, on department letterhead, signed by 2 officers whose names were on the supervision logs Harris had been reading the night before. Not Dutton. Not Dawkins. 2 people above them, a captain and a deputy commander whose involvement in the suppression of the prior complaints had been, Up to that morning, speculative on Harris's part and circumstantial on the AG's. The letter was not a confession. It was a request for a cooperation agreement. They were, in the specific legal terminology, offering to provide information. The AG's investigator, the woman with the flat businesslike voice, read it twice and called her supervisor, who called the AG directly, who said 4 words that set the press conference time change in motion. Expand the scope again. Harris was in the building when the call came through. He was standing near the window against. He kept ending up at windows, he noticed, which was probably telling him something about his stress responses, when his phone rang and the deputy chief told him the press conference was moving up. Why? The deputy chief told him about the letter. Harris was quiet for a moment. Who signed it? The deputy chief told him. Harris looked out the window, the parking lot, the street beyond, the ordinary Thursday morning of a city that did not yet know what was about to be said at a press conference that was now 43 minutes away. Harris, the deputy chief said, this is bigger than Dutton. I know. It's been bigger than Dutton. I know that too. He ended the call, put on his jacket, checked that he had his notes. At the Delwood Police Department, 3 floors up from where Harris stood, Roy Dawkins had not left the building the previous night. He had spent it in a holding room with his own attorney, a man named Forsyth, who had been woken at 11 p.m., and who had arrived looking rumpled and sharp-eyed, and who had spent 4 hours conducting a conversation with his client that could only be described as a controlled excavation. What Forsyth had excavated was worse than he'd expected, and better, marginally, than the worst case. And at 6 a.m. he had made a call to the AG's office that had set in motion the letter that had arrived at 9:17. Dawkins knew what he'd done. He'd known it at various levels of clarity for years, and the clarity had increased in direct proportion to the size of what was happening around him. There was a particular lucid awfulness to the understanding, fully arrived at, no more room for rationalization, that the thing you'd looked at and decided was manageable had, on a Tuesday morning, sent a woman in scrubs to a military medical center in a helicopter while 14 million strangers watched what you'd helped create. He didn't know Mara Sutton. He had never met her. His choices had nothing to do with her specifically and everything to do with Carl Dutton and a decade of deciding that managing Carl Dutton was easier than confronting him. He knew that wasn't a defense. Forsyth had been very clear on that point. At 9:40, the press conference began. Harris stood at the edge of the room. The AG's lead investigator stood at the podium. The deputy chief was to her left. Behind them, on a screen, was a timeline. Dates, complaints, disposition records that told a story most people in that room were seeing for the first time. The investigator said, "The investigation into Officer Carl Dutton's conduct on the morning of Tuesday, September 17th, has expanded to encompass a pattern of misconduct and supervisory suppression spanning a period of approximately 9 years. We are today announcing charges against Officer Dutton on 4 counts, including obstruction of emergency response and abuse of authority. Additionally, charges are being prepared against 2 supervisory officers whose identities will be released as processing is completed." In the third row, a journalist Mara didn't know was already texting the news to Petra Wills, who was in her car outside Mercer Military Medical waiting for a scheduled interview that, due to events currently unfolding 40 minutes across town, was going to need to be significantly expanded in scope. In the recovery room on the 2nd floor, Marcus Sutton had eaten half a bowl of applesauce and was negotiating with limited success for Mara to bring his tablet from home. "I'll think about it," Mara said. "That means no." "It means I'll think about it." His color was better. His eyes were clear. When the day shift nurse came in and asked him on a scale of 1 to 10 how much it hurt, he said 4, then reconsidered and said 3.5, because he was, Mara had always known, more accurate than dramatic. She stepped out into the hallway to take a call she'd been expecting. Prentice. "The press conference is running," he said. 4 charges confirmed on Dutton, 2 supervisors identified. The names will be public by noon. I heard. "There's something else." A pause, not dramatic, just Prentice calibrating what he was about to say. "The journalist, Wills. She's outside the building. She'd like to talk to you today when you're ready. I told her it was your decision entirely." Mara leaned against the corridor wall. Down the hall, an orderly was pushing a cart, the wheels making a small rhythmic squeak. Normal sounds. Hospital sounds. She'd worked in this noise for years and it had never felt as grounding as it did right now. "There's something I need to know first," she said, "before I talk to anyone." "What is it?" "The Korengal record, the part that's been declassified." She kept her voice even. "I need to read it. My own record. I've never seen the official version of what was written about what happened there. They told me at discharge it was classified and I'd—" She stopped. "I just need to read it first." A silence on Prentice's end. "I'll have it sent to you within the hour," he said. "Thank you." She hung up, stood in the hallway for another moment. Then she went back to Marcus, who had gotten hold of a second half bowl of applesauce and was eating it with the focused satisfaction of someone who has decided this constitutes a victory. Mara sat down, looked at her son. The tablet negotiation resumed. She was halfway through explaining why screen time in a hospital recovery room was a different category than screen time at home when her phone buzzed. Prentice, a message, not a call. A secure link, a document. Your record. When you're ready. She looked at it. Then she put the phone face down on the arm of the chair because Marcus was talking and she was listening, and the record had waited 4 years and could wait another hour. She would read it, but not yet. What she did not know, in that specific moment of ordinary hospital time, her son talking, the monitor beeping, the applesauce being consumed at a pace she found genuinely impressive, was that someone had read it already. Someone had read the declassified portion of her Korengal record and made a decision, and that decision was traveling toward her right now in the form of a phone call that would come in 53 minutes from a number with a Virginia area code, and the voice on the other end of that call would belong to someone whose title, when the major's assistant announced it, would make Mara Sutton stand up from the chair beside her son's bed and press her back against the wall and stop breathing for a full 4 seconds. The call came in at 11:43. Mara had been reading the document for 20 minutes by then. The declassified portion of her Korengal record, transmitted through the secure link Prentice had sent, formatted in the specific spare language of military operational reporting that she recognized from years of reading after-action notes. It was strange to read about yourself in that register. The document referred to her consistently as SFC Sutton, M, rank, surname, initial, and described what had happened on the ridge above Korengal Valley in October 2019 in the same flat, sequential prose that the Army used to describe everything from equipment requisitions to firefights. She had known what happened. She had been there. But reading the official version, the version that had existed in a classified file for 4 years without her ever seeing it, was different from remembering it. The document named things she had not named to herself. It used words like decisive medical intervention, under direct enemy contact, and single-handedly maintained treatment continuity for 4 critically wounded personnel during a 6-hour engagement, and actions directly responsible for the survival of 3 service members who would otherwise have been non-recoverable given field conditions. Non-recoverable. The clinical term for what she'd refused to accept was possible. She was on the 3rd page when the phone rang. Virginia area code. She didn't recognize the number. She looked at it for 1 ring, 2 rings, then answered. Sergeant Sutton. A man's voice. Not young, not performing authority, actually carrying it, the way certain voices do when authority has been a daily condition for so long it stops being something you put on. This is Lieutenant General Warren Colbeck, Army Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel. She stood up from the chair. She didn't decide to. Her body did it. Her back found the wall. Sir, she said, I'll keep this brief because I understand your son is recovering and this isn't the time for a lengthy conversation. A pause. Not hesitation, just pacing. I've read your record, Sergeant, the complete record, not just what's been declassified. I want you to know that. Another pause. What happened to you Tuesday morning should not have happened. And what happened to you after your discharge, the manner in which your service was classified and then simply filed away without any formal recognition, that also should not have happened. Mara kept her breathing even. Old habit. The soldier's medal process has been accelerated at my recommendation, Colbeck continued. That's one piece of it. The other piece is that the Army intends to formally acknowledge your Korengal service at the ceremony. Not the operational specifics, those stay classified, but the nature of your role, the outcomes, and the commendations that were withheld. You'll be seen, Sergeant, properly. He paused once more. I wanted to tell you that personally, rather than have it arrive through channels. She was looking at Marcus. He'd fallen asleep again, the applesauce bowl on the tray beside him, one arm flung out in the sprawling way he slept that had not changed since he was 3. Thank you, sir, she said. Her voice was steady. She had no idea how. How's your boy? The question caught her slightly off guard. Not the content, the tone. Genuine, not formal. Better. He's got a good surgical team. Good. And then, because he was a man who understood that the professional and the human were not always separate things. You've carried a lot, Sergeant, for a long time, quietly. That's noted. He ended the call without ceremony. Mara stood with her back against the wall for another few seconds. Then she slid down it slightly, not all the way to the floor, just enough to change her relationship to gravity, and pressed the phone against her sternum and looked at the ceiling. Down the hall, the orderly's cart made its small, rhythmic squeak. Marcus slept. She gave herself 90 seconds. Exactly 90. Then she straightened up, walked back to the chair, and picked up the document where she'd left off. Petra Wills got 45 minutes with Mara Sutton at 2 o'clock that afternoon, in the same small conference room off the surgical wing where Prentice had brought her a sandwich the night before. Mara had conditions. 1. Nothing about Marcus beyond the confirmed fact that he was recovering. 2. Nothing from her service record beyond what had been officially declassified as of today. 3. Wills could quote her directly or not at all. No paraphrasing, no sources familiar with constructions. Wills agreed to all 3 without negotiation, which told Mara she was dealing with someone who actually wanted the story rather than a version of it. They sat across a table from each other. Wills had a recorder and a notepad. She was in her late 30s with the particular quality of attention that good journalists develop. Not aggressive, not performative, just genuinely focused. Mara had met enough people who were good at their jobs to recognize it as a specific kind of skill. I want to start with Tuesday morning, Wills said. Not with your service record. That can come after. Just Tuesday morning from your perspective, from the beginning. So Mara told it. She told it the way she told things, say, without embellishment, without editorial, in the order it happened. Woke up, heard Marcus cough, the assessment, the drive, the 2 interactions with Dutton, the card, the phone call, the helicopter. She told it in about 10 minutes. Wills didn't interrupt once. When she finished, Wills was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When he pulled away the second time, what were you thinking?" Mara looked at the table. "I was thinking about my son's breathing pattern and whether I had time to try a third route to the hospital. Not about Dutton? He wasn't useful to me at that point. I stopped thinking about him." Wills wrote something. "The card you used, the priority response card. You said you almost didn't take it at discharge." "I thought it was ceremonial." "But you kept it." Mara looked at her. "I keep everything I'm given at discharge. It's habit." A pause. "I'm glad I do." Wills nodded. She asked several more questions about the intersection, about Prentice's arrival, about the salute, which Mara described with the same plainness she'd described everything else. Then Wills set down her pen. "I need to ask you something off the direct record," she said. "You can tell me no." "Ask it." "The prior complaints against Dutton, the suppression. When you found out about that yesterday, what did you feel?" Mara was quiet for a moment. "I felt like it explained the shape of the thing. A man doesn't turn away from a sick child in front of witnesses unless he spent years learning there's no cost to that. Someone taught him there was no cost." She paused. "I don't feel good about what's happening to him. I don't feel bad about it either. I feel like it's correct." That's an unusual answer. It's the accurate one. Wills looked at her for a moment. "Last question. Lieutenant General Colbeck called you this morning." Mara's expression didn't change. "You know about that." "I know a call was placed. I don't know what was said." "Then that's what you know." Wills smiled slightly. "Fair enough." She clicked off the recorder. "Sergeant Sutton, For what it's worth, from someone who covers military affairs for a living, what's in your record, the parts I've been able to access, is extraordinary. The fact that it's been sitting in a classified file for 4 years is... She stopped, chose a different word. Remarkable. Mara stood up, extended her hand. Write it accurately, she said. That's all I ask. Masset. By Thursday evening, Carl Dutton had been charged formally on 4 counts. The charging documents were public record, and Petra Wills had them by 4:30. She published her piece, the full piece, the one that had taken shape over 36 hours of reporting, at 6 p.m., and by 8, it had been picked up by every major national outlet and shared approximately 2 million times. The piece was titled The 13 Minutes, What Carl Dutton Did, Who Mara Sutton Is, and What a Decade of Ignored Complaints Built. It was long. It was precise. It named Dutton, Dawkins, Captain Lyle Ostroff, and Deputy Commander Fitch Barroway, the 2 supervisors whose cooperation agreement had fractured the department's internal cover story, and it laid out, in the specific sequential clarity that Wills was good at, how each complaint had been classified, rerouted, or buried, and by whose hands. It was the Barroway section that hit hardest. Barroway had been in his position for 7 years. His name appeared in the supervision logs at the moment of 3 separate complaint dispositions. And in 2 of those cases, the reclassification notations, the procedural marks that turned misconduct complaint into resolved, insufficient evidence, were in his handwriting. The cooperation agreement he'd signed meant that in exchange for providing testimony against Dutton and Dawkins, he'd negotiated a reduced charge structure. But the documentation Wills had obtained through the state AG's public records disclosure made the nature of his involvement clear regardless of what he'd negotiated. Harris read the piece at his kitchen table at 7:30 p.m. With the particular experience of seeing information he'd spent 2 days assembling, rendered into clean paragraphs by someone who hadn't been inside the building. It was accurate. That was the part he kept landing on. He had expected the shape of it to be distorted by the speed of the reporting, by the emotional charge of the footage, by the incentives that exist in any major story to simplify what is complicated. Instead, it was precise, properly caveated, and, for the parts he could personally verify, correct in every specific detail. He texted Wills's contact number, which the AG's office had shared with him that afternoon. The piece is accurate. That matters. She texted back within a minute. Thank you. That also matters. He put his phone down, looked at the kitchen ceiling, thought about Fitch Barroway, whom he had worked alongside for 4 years, and who had once helped him move an air conditioning unit from a 3rd-floor storage room without being asked, and who had also, in the same 4 years, been the hand on the pen that wrote insufficient evidence across 3 complaints that were not insufficient. People were not simple. Harris had known that for a long time. It didn't make the Barroway section of Wills's piece easier to sit with. Ditpot. Friday morning arrived in Delwood with the specific quality that follows a major public revelation. A kind of collective altered state, the city running on its normal routines while something shifted in the background register of things. People went to work, coffee shops opened, traffic moved through the intersections that had been unblocked since Tuesday. At the Delwood PD, a department spokesperson gave a prepared statement at 8 a.m. that expressed the department's full cooperation with the state AG's investigation and its commitment to accountability and transparent review processes. The statement was careful, measured, and completely believable to no one who had read Wills's piece the night before. Dutton's attorney, not Foss, who had withdrawn from the case Thursday evening, citing irreconcilable conflicts of interest, gave a counter-statement outside the precinct at 9 that described his client as a dedicated officer being subjected to a media-driven rush to judgment. He looked composed. He sounded composed. The statement was recorded by 11 journalists and shared in the context of Wills's piece approximately as often as you'd expect a counter-statement to be shared in that context, which was not very often. Ostroff, the captain, had not made a public statement. He was processing his own negotiation with a different attorney in a different room, and the complexity of what he was negotiating had to do with the specific question of how many years of documented complaint suppression constituted a criminal conspiracy versus a series of individual judgment failures, which was, his attorney had told him, a distinction that would take several weeks to resolve, and that would not resolve in his favor if he said anything public in the meantime. Barroway had said nothing. He had gone home Thursday night under conditions of the cooperation agreement and had, according to his attorney's office, no comment for the foreseeable future. Harris went to work. He continued building the documentation package for the AG. He answered questions from investigators. He ate a sandwich at his desk at noon and didn't taste it. He was 3 hours into the afternoon when the call came from downstairs that he'd been expecting since reading Wills's piece the night before. A woman named Sandra Delacroix was in the lobby. She wanted to speak with Internal Affairs. She had footage, she said, the cell phone video that had been flagged as inconclusive 14 months ago. She had the original unedited version, which, as Harris had suspected since reading the Dawkins interview notes, was not the same as the version that had been submitted to the complaint process. Someone had edited the version on file. 14 seconds had been removed from the middle. Harris went downstairs himself. Sandra Delacroix was in her mid-40s, with the careful composure of someone who has been told once that her account was insufficient and has spent over a year deciding whether to try again. She was carrying a phone in a plastic bag. The original phone, she said, not a copy. The same phone she'd had at the traffic stop, which she had not wiped or reset because she had understood somehow that she might need it. Harris looked at the phone in the bag. He looked at Delacroix. I saw the story, she said. The nurse. I saw it Tuesday night, and I couldn't. She stopped, started again. I filed that complaint 14 months ago, and they told me there wasn't enough evidence. And I watched that footage of him talking to her, and I knew. Knew what? That it was the same. She met his eyes, the way he talked to her, the way he didn't look at her, like she was something in the road. Her jaw tightened. That's how he talked to me. Harris asked her to come upstairs. Mara didn't see the Delacroix development until Saturday morning, when Prentice sent her a summary alongside a brief message. The scope keeps expanding. How are you both? She typed back, Marcus ate a full breakfast. Scope can do what it needs to do. What it was doing, by Saturday, was expanding in directions that had moved beyond Carl Dutton as a central figure and into the structural question of how a department manages, or fails to manage, an officer whose pattern of behavior is known internally while remaining officially undocumented. The AG's office had issued a second statement Friday afternoon announcing an audit of the department's complaint classification system going back 12 years, which meant Dutton's file was now one data point in a considerably larger inquiry. Dutton himself had been in a position, through all of this, that was progressively less navigable. His attorney's counterstatement had achieved nothing beyond briefly irritating the journalists who were now covering the story daily. The body cam footage, overlaid with the 911 audio shared across 2 continents, had generated a volume of public attention that no PR strategy was capable of managing. And Delacroix's phone, once submitted to evidence processing, contained 14 seconds of video that the AG's investigator had described, in a text to Harris that Harris had read twice, as unambiguous. On Saturday afternoon, Dutton's attorney filed a request to withdraw from the case. This was not public immediately, but it was public within 2 hours because the filing was a court document and court documents were accessible, and Wills had a source in the county clerk's office who sent her a notification the moment anything new appeared under Dutton's case number. She published the update at 4:17 p.m. By 5 o'clock, it had been shared 400,000 times. Marcus was cleared for discharge on Sunday. Dr. Haddad did the final assessment herself. Drain output at acceptable levels, fever resolved, incision site clean, mobility improving. She gave Mara a detailed discharge protocol and a follow-up schedule and answered every question Mara asked, which took approximately 25 minutes because Mara asked precise questions. He should avoid anything that engages his core for at least 3 weeks, Haddad said. Walking is fine. Encouraged, actually. School in 2 weeks if the energy is there. No gym class for a month. Marcus, who had been listening from the bed. What about video games? Haddad looked at him. Video games don't engage your core. Marcus looked at Mara with an expression of absolute vindication. Mara helped him dress in the clothes her sister had brought over Friday. Jeans, a shirt with a logo on it from a game Mara didn't entirely understand, Sneakers he was now able to put on himself with only mild discomfort. He was slow. He was careful. He didn't complain about the slowness or the care, which was unlike him under normal circumstances, and told her more about his residual discomfort than his pain scale answers had. Brennan, the night shift nurse, was ending her shift when they came through the hallway. She was at the nurse's station doing notes, and she looked up when she heard them, and she smiled at Marcus with the genuine warmth of someone who'd checked on him 3 nights running. "Leaving us?" she said. "Yeah," Marcus said. Then, with the unpredictable social grace that 9-year-olds occasionally produce without warning, "Thank you for taking care of me." Brennan looked at him for a moment. "You're very welcome, Marcus." In the elevator, Mara looked down at her son. He was leaning against her arm more than he usually would, not quite well enough to be fully himself, tired in a residual way that would take weeks to resolve completely. She put her arm around him. The elevator opened onto the ground floor. Colonel Prentice was in the lobby. He wasn't in uniform, civilian clothes, weekend casual, which made him look approximately like a man who had stopped by, except that you didn't accidentally stop by a military medical center on a Sunday morning. He was holding 2 paper cups of coffee, one of which he held out to Mara when she came through the doors. She took it. "You didn't need to come." "I was in the area." She looked at him. "I was not in the area," he admitted. "I wanted to see him go home." Marcus had stopped beside her, looking at Prentice with the frank, evaluative gaze of a child who is trying to place someone. "Are you the one who came in the big truck?" "I came in the car behind the big truck," Prentice said. Marcus considered this. "Okay." He seemed to find it satisfactory. He started toward the exit, moving carefully, hand trailing the wall. Prentice walked beside Mara toward the door. "The ceremony is confirmed, 63 days from now at Fort Calloway. The Secretary's office confirmed Friday." Mara nodded. "There will be media. The Army is not going to try to manage that away." "I know. How do you feel about it?" She watched Marcus push the glass door open with one hand, step out into the pale Sunday morning light, turn his face up toward it. He'd been inside since Tuesday. The light hit him, and he stopped for a second, eyes closing, just receiving it. A 9-year-old standing in morning sun outside a hospital door. "I feel like my son is going home," she said. Prentice nodded, drank his coffee. They walked out. By Sunday evening, Carl Dutton was without legal representation for the first time since Tuesday. His original attorney had withdrawn. The replacement his family had located had taken a 2-hour meeting with him Saturday afternoon, reviewed the documentation package the AG's office had disclosed, and called Sunday morning to say she would not be taking the case. Not because of the visibility, she handled visible cases, but because of the Delacroix footage. 14 seconds. She had described it to her associate as the kind of footage that makes a case undefendable at trial and offers nothing useful in a plea negotiation either, because the conduct it documented overlapped with 2 of the 4 charges against Dutton in ways that were not incidental. Dutton sat in his apartment Sunday night with a list of 3 attorneys who had been willing to take an initial consultation call and a television he hadn't turned on since Tuesday because every channel had something on it that he couldn't watch. He thought about the Delacroix stop. He thought about it the way you think about something you decided at the time was containable, the specific quality of that decision, the moment where you assess a risk and conclude it's manageable and move on. He had moved on. Dawkins had helped him move on. Ostroff had processed the paperwork that made moving on the official record. 3 of those 4 people were now in various states of legal jeopardy, and the 4th was sitting in an apartment with a list of attorneys and a cold cup of coffee and a television he couldn't turn on. He thought about 13 minutes. He thought about how that phrase had attached itself to the story. Wills's piece, the social media posts, the news chyrons. 13 minutes. The time between when Mara Sutton first approached him and when the military convoy arrived. He had not been timing it. He had not thought about it afterward, not that morning or that afternoon. It had been an interaction, one of dozens in a shift, a woman in scrubs asking him for something he'd decided was not his problem. 13 minutes. He picked up the attorney list, put it back down, picked up his phone and looked at it and set it face down on the table. Somewhere across the city, in an apartment Dutton had never seen and a neighborhood he'd never been to, Sandra Delacroix had given a 15-minute interview to a video journalist whose piece had published at noon Sunday and had, by the time Dutton was sitting in his apartment staring at his phone, been viewed 700,000 times. She spoke quietly in the interview. She didn't perform anger. She said what had happened and what had been done with her complaint and what she'd done with the phone and why. When the journalist asked her what she wanted, she said she wanted the 14 seconds to exist in the official record. She wanted it counted. "I filed a complaint," she said. "I did what you're supposed to do, and someone decided it wasn't enough. I just want it to be enough now." Wills embedded the interview in her Sunday evening update piece. Harris read it at his kitchen table and thought about Roy Dawkins writing insufficient evidence in his precise, legible handwriting on a form that had Sandra Delacroix's name at the top. His phone rang. The AG's lead investigator. "Lieutenant Harris." She had the same flat, businesslike tone as always, but there was something slightly different in the pace of it tonight. "I wanted you to know before it goes public tomorrow morning. The audit is complete on the complaint classification records. 12 years. Harris waited. "We've identified 9 additional complaints that show signs of improper classification or disposition. 7 of those involve Officer Dutton. 2 involve a second officer whose name I can't share yet, pending notification." 9. Harris looked at his kitchen ceiling. He did the math he didn't want to do, the one where 9 complaints over 12 years meant 9 people who had filed, 9 interactions that had warranted the filing, and an unknown number of interactions that hadn't resulted in a complaint, because people didn't file. People didn't believe filing would do anything. People had learned through 1,000 signals that the system was not built to receive their experience and use it. "Is the department going to get ahead of this tomorrow? Or are you releasing it first?" he asked. "We're releasing at 8 a.m. I'm calling you as a courtesy." "I appreciate it." "Lieutenant?" A pause that was slightly longer than her usual pacing. "The work you did Thursday night pulling those logs, the timeline you built, it gave us a map we didn't have. I wanted to say that directly." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said, "I'll see you tomorrow." He put the phone down, looked at the kitchen, the ordinary Saturday night, no Sunday night quiet of it. 9 complaints. He was still sitting there 20 minutes later when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize, then recognized, because Wills had given him her cell number 2 days ago. "Heads up, I have the audit numbers. Publishing tonight, not waiting for morning. I wanted to give you a heads up because of Thursday." He stared at the text. Typed back, "How?" Wills. "Same way I got everything else. Sources do what sources do when they believe the story matters." Harris. "Is it accurate?" Wills. "I verified it against the documentation I already had." "Yes." He looked at the clock. 9:47 p.m. Sunday. He typed, "Then publish it." He put his phone down for the last time that night, pushed back from the table, and stood up. The kitchen light was doing the faint buzz it had been doing for 3 weeks and that he hadn't fixed yet. He looked at it, made a note to fix it tomorrow. He went to bed. The piece published at 11 p.m. By midnight, it had been shared 800,000 times. By 2 a.m., a national television producer had called Wills's cell and woken her to ask about interview availability. By 4 a.m., the story of 9 complaints, 12 years, and the specific anatomy of how a department teaches a man there is no cost to his behavior had crossed into international coverage for the first time. And in Fort Calloway's public affairs office, 300 miles away, a major who had been awake since 3 a.m., managing an inbox that had tripled in volume overnight, was drafting the official announcement of Mara Sutton's Soldier's Medal ceremony, now moved up 2 weeks at the secretary's direction, when her desk phone rang with a call she had not been expecting. She listened for 90 seconds, said, "I understand, sir. I'll relay that immediately." Hung up, sat for a moment, then opened a new email, addressed it to Colonel Prentice, and typed a subject line that was 3 words long. She hesitated with her finger over the send key, not because she was uncertain about sending it, but because the 3 words in the subject line were, she understood, going to change the shape of what was already a significant story into something none of them had fully anticipated when the week began. She pressed send. Across the city, in a hospital apartment suite that Mercer Medical maintained for family members of recovering patients, which Prentice had quietly arranged for Mara on Thursday without making anything of it. Mara Sutton's phone lit up on the nightstand at 4:18 a.m. She woke immediately. Combat sleep. She always woke immediately. She looked at the notification. An email. Prentice forwarding something with a single line of his own text above the forwarded content. Mara, read this when you're ready. Take your time. She sat up. Read it. The forwarded email was from the Fort Calloway public affairs major. The subject line was the thing she read first, in the preview, before she even opened it. 3 words. She opened the email and read the full content, which was 4 paragraphs in the careful, formal language of official Army communication, and which said, in that careful, formal language, something that she had not known was possible, that she had not been told to expect, that she had not, in 3 years of quiet civilian life, allowed herself to consider as a thing that might ever exist in the space between what she'd done and what had been acknowledged. She sat in the dark with her phone for a long time. Down the hall, Marcus was asleep. She looked at the wall, at the dark, at the 3 words in the subject line that were still on her screen. She read them one more time. More. And outside, the city turned slowly toward morning, carrying everything the week had broken open. 9 complaints, 4 charges, 2 supervisors, 1 department, 1 street, 13 minutes, moving toward whatever came next, while Mara Sutton sat in a dark room and held in her hands something that should have existed 4 years ago, and that existed now, and that she had not known, until this moment, how much she had needed. The 3 words in the subject line were, Presidential Unit Citation, not for her alone, for the unit she'd served with, a designation that had been classified along with everything else, that had existed in sealed files while the people who'd earned it went back to their civilian lives and said nothing because nothing was what the job required. The Presidential Unit Citation was the highest award a military unit could receive, and it meant that what had happened on that ridge in Korengal Valley in October 2019 was being formally recognized not as a footnote in a classified file, but as a matter of national record. Mara read the 4 paragraphs twice. Then she set the phone face down on the nightstand and lay back down in the dark and looked at the ceiling. She didn't sleep. She thought about the men she'd kept alive. She thought about their faces. Not the way they'd looked at their worst, which was the version her brain had defaulted to for years, but the way they'd looked afterward. The particular expression that comes back into a face when a body realizes it's going to survive. She had seen that expression 7 times in 6 years of deployment. 3 of those 7 times had been on that ridge. She thought about the weight of a person, not metaphorically, literally, the physical weight of a man who can no longer carry himself. The math of moving that weight under fire in terrain that wasn't designed for moving anything anywhere. She had done the math with her body and not thought about it afterward because afterward there were always more things to do. She had not thought of herself as someone who needed to be recognized. She had thought of recognition as something that happened to other people. In ceremonies she watched from the back of the room. She lay in the dark and let herself for the first time consider what it meant that the back of the room was not where she was going to be standing this time. At 5:40 a.m. she got up, made coffee in the small suite kitchen, and called Prentice. He answered on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake. "You read it," he said. "I read it. How are you?" She looked at the window, the gray early light starting to define the edges of things outside. Trying to locate the right response to something I didn't know I was waiting for. A pause. That sounds about right. The unit members, the ones who made it back, are they being notified? They were notified last night, the same time you were. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. Good. It should be theirs too. It is theirs. It is. The ceremony will reflect that. She drank her coffee. It was too hot, and she drank it anyway. Prentice, I want to go back to work. At Mercer? At Harwell General, my ER. I've been gone 6 days. A pause. Marcus goes back to school in 2 weeks. I need to be doing the work I know how to do. Nothing's stopping you. People are going to know who I am now. At work. That's different. He considered that. Yes, it is. He didn't try to minimize it. Is that a problem for you? She thought about it honestly. I don't know yet. I'll find out. She set down the coffee cup. I'm not a different person because of what's in that file. I was already the person in that file. I just also happened to be the nurse in Bay 7 who argued with Dr. Reyes about potassium drip rates last Thursday. Prentice made a sound that was almost a laugh. I'm sure Reyes is thrilled about the week you've had. Reyes doesn't know yet. She almost smiled. That's going to be a whole thing. Carl Dutton's third attorney appeared in the case record on Monday morning. A man named Aldrich Bowe, who had a reputation for taking difficult cases and a secondary reputation, which was more accurate, for taking cases where the fee was substantial enough to compensate for the visibility. He filed an initial appearance and then made no public statement, which was the correct strategy and also the only available one. The AG's office released the audit results at 8 a.m., as promised. 9 complaints. 7 linked to Dutton. 2 linked to a second officer, a patrol sergeant named Jervis Holt, whose name was new to the public but not to the officers who had worked alongside him for the past 8 years and who had understood, in the way people understand things they don't say out loud, that there was a specific kind of stop Holt made that was not about traffic violations. Holt was placed on administrative leave Monday morning. He did not come to the station to turn in his badge. He sent it with his attorney. The department spokesperson gave a second statement. It was longer than the first, more specific about the audit and the AG's process, and it included a line that had not appeared in the first statement. The Delwood Police Department acknowledges that its internal complaint review processes failed multiple members of the public over an extended period of time. This failure is unacceptable and will be addressed through structural reform. Harris had reviewed that line before it went out. He had suggested it to the deputy chief at 7:30 a.m. in a conversation that lasted 11 minutes and that the deputy chief, to his credit, had not pushed back on. Failure is unacceptable was not the same as we are sorry. Harris knew that. Sandra Delacroix knew it, he suspected. But it was the first time in 12 years that the word failure had appeared in an official department statement in connection with how it handled the people who came to it for help and were turned away. And it meant something, even if what it meant was the beginning of a longer conversation rather than the end of one. The Soldiers' Medal ceremony was held at Fort Calloway on a Thursday morning, 49 days after Mara Sutton had dialed a number from the back of a card she'd kept in her wallet for 3 years. The day was clear and cold, the kind of November morning where the light has a quality of particular precision, everything edged and bright. The ceremony grounds were set up outside the main administrative building, a platform, chairs, a podium, a color guard, a crowd that was larger than these things usually drew because of the cameras and because of who was coming. Mara drove herself. She had been offered a car and declined. She needed the 20 minutes in the car by herself, the way she'd always needed the transition time between one context and another. She parked in the designated lot, sat for a moment, checked her reflection out of habit, and then stopped because it didn't matter, and got out. Her sister Dina was waiting near the entrance with Marcus, who was in dress clothes he'd complained about for the entirety of the previous evening, and who had, upon seeing the military vehicles in the parking lot, immediately stopped complaining and gone quiet in the specific way of a child who is recalibrating the significance of an occasion. He looked at his mother when she walked up, in her dress uniform, the one she'd had dry cleaned twice before she was satisfied with it, the one with the patches and the ribbons arranged in their precise order, the one that had been in a garment bag in her closet for 3 years. He didn't say anything for a second. Then, "You look different." "It's the uniform." He studied it. "No," he said, with the unsettling perceptiveness that he occasionally produced. "It's not just the uniform." Dina put her arm around Mara briefly, the kind of contact that communicates everything and requires no elaboration. Mara let it land. They went in. The ceremony was not long. Military ceremonies rarely are. They value precision over duration, and the people who design them understand that meaning doesn't require length. Prentice was on the platform. Lieutenant General Colbeck was there, as promised, which was not always guaranteed with flag officers, and confirmed to Mara something about the weight he personally assigned to being present. There were 6 other people on the platform whose names she had been told, and whose faces she now matched to those names, including 2 from her unit, 2 of the 3 from the Ridge, the only 2 currently stateside, both of whom had contacted her through official channels in the past 3 weeks, and one of whom, a man named Travell Okafor, who had been a staff sergeant in 2019 and was now a civilian engineer in Phoenix, had sent her a message that she had read 4 times and still couldn't think about without doing something complicated with her face. The message had said, "I've been trying to figure out what to write for 3 weeks. I think the most accurate thing I can say is that I'm here because of you, and I've spent 4 years knowing that and not having any way to say it that felt like enough. Maybe this is enough. Maybe not. But I wanted you to know that I know." Okafor was in the second row of chairs. When Mara walked past to take her position, he stood. Not because protocol required it, just because he stood. And she looked at him, and he looked at her, and something passed between them that had no verbal form and didn't need one. She took her position. Colbeck spoke. He was precise, unhurried, neither cold nor performed. He described the Korengal engagement in the terms that had been cleared for public release: the nature of the terrain, the duration of the contact, the medical conditions. He did not describe what Mara had specifically done because the specific details remained classified, but he described the outcomes, and the outcomes were specific enough. 3 service members were recovered alive from a situation in which survival was not expected, he said. 1 medic held the line. The Army does not forget that. It takes too long sometimes, but it does not forget. Then the medal. The soldier's medal was pinned to her uniform by Colbeck himself, which was not standard and which meant he had specifically requested it. She stood at attention while he did it. His hands were steady. He took a half step back and rendered a salute, held it. She returned it. The crowd, not large, maybe 200 people, but dense with significance, was quiet for a moment. Then it wasn't. Marcus, in the 4th row, was clapping with the specific full-body enthusiasm of a 9-year-old who has decided this is the appropriate response and is committed to it. Dina had her hand over her mouth. Okafor was standing again, and the man beside him, another vet, she didn't know him, stood as well, and then the standing spread through the rows the way it does when something real has happened and people need to be vertical for it. Mara stood on the platform and looked at the crowd and thought, I don't know how to do this part. She had never known how to do this part. The receiving, the being seen. She had spent 6 years being effective in the dark, in the dust, in the noise, and she had been good at it precisely because it required nothing from her but the work. This required something different, and she didn't have a muscle for it yet. She was going to have to build one. She looked at Marcus, standing in the 4th row, clapping with everything he had, 9 years old and entirely unaware that he was the reason any of this had accelerated, that his drainage tube and his recovery numbers and his request for screen time in a hospital bed had been, in some indirect and genuine way, the mechanism by which 4 years of sealed documentation had finally come open. She looked at him and allowed herself, in front of 200 people and however many cameras, to not be composed. It lasted about 4 seconds. Then she was composed again. But those 4 seconds were real, and they were hers, and the cameras caught them, and when the footage circulated, which it did, immediately and widely, the 4 seconds were what people talked about. Not the medal, not the uniform. The 4 seconds of a woman who had held the line for other people, in every context, in every room, for 6 years of war and 3 years of quiet civilian life, and one Tuesday morning on a gridlocked street, finally letting something show. Carl Dutton was convicted on all 4 counts 11 weeks later. The trial lasted 6 days. Aldrich Bowe made the arguments available to him, which were not many and were not effective, because the body cam footage and the 911 audio and the Delacroix phone video and the dispatch logs and the testimony of Sandra Delacroix herself, who sat in the witness chair and spoke in the same quiet, deliberate way she'd spoken in the video interview, looking at Bowe's cross-examination with the patience of someone who has already spent 14 months being told her account was insufficient, constituted a record that juries understand in their bones even before they understand it in their heads. The verdict took 4 hours. Obstruction of emergency response, abuse of authority, falsification of official records, misconduct under color of law. The bailiff read them in sequence. Dutton sat at the defense table with his hands flat on the surface in front of him and his face arranged in an expression that was trying to be neutral and landing somewhere closer to the look of a man who is processing a weight he's been avoiding for a very long time. His badge had already been administratively stripped pending trial. His pension, 22 years of accumulated benefit, was revoked under the state's law enforcement misconduct statute, a provision that existed specifically for convictions involving abuse of authority. He was sentenced to 28 months, with the sentencing judge stating in the portion of her remarks that every outlet would, quote, "You had the power, the proximity, and the obligation to help. You chose otherwise. That choice had consequences for a child and a mother that you did not consider because you had learned over years that your choices did not require consideration. This court is correcting that lesson." Roy Dawkins pled guilty to 2 counts of misconduct in office and 1 count of evidence tampering, the classification of the Delacroix complaint, the edited footage. He received 18 months and permanent decertification, which meant he would not work in law enforcement again in any capacity in this state or any state that honored the registry, which was most of them. Fitch Barraway's cooperation had reduced his charge to a single count of misconduct. He received a suspended sentence, decertification, and the specific public humiliation of having his name appear in the AG's final report under a section titled Systemic Failure at the Supervisory Level in language that was precise and thorough and that would follow his name in any search for the foreseeable future. Lyle Ostroff received the same outcome as Barraway. He had been in his position for 7 years. He would not be in any similar position again. The state legislature, 4 months after the verdict, passed the Verified Emergency Response Act, which required patrol officers to respond to dispatch-confirmed pediatric medical emergencies within their proximity, with refusal constituting grounds for immediate administrative review. It was not named after Mara Sutton at her request. She had made that request clearly and early, and the bill's sponsors had honored it. Harris read the final AG report the day it was released, all 87 pages of it, at his kitchen table, with the overhead light fixed and working properly. When he finished, he sat for a while. He thought about the 9 complaints. He thought about the years they represented. He thought about the people who had filed them and the specific act of courage that filing a complaint requires. The belief, despite evidence to the contrary, that the system might receive you. 7 of those 9 people had been contacted as part of the investigation. All 7 had responded. Several had given testimony. Sandra Delacroix had attended every public hearing. None of them had gotten what they filed for when they filed. None of them had been received the way they deserved to be received. They were received now. Late. Imperfectly. With the specific inadequacy of accountability that arrives after the fact. But received. Harris didn't know if that was enough. He suspected it wasn't, not fully, not for all of them. But he'd been in this work long enough to know that not enough and nothing were not the same thing, and that the distance between them, however insufficient, was where the work happened. He closed the report, fixed himself dinner. Mara went back to the ER at Harwell General on a Monday morning 3 weeks after the ceremony. She had expected it to be strange. It was, in some ways. The charge nurse at the desk had done a double take when she walked through the door that Mara had decided to find amusing rather than uncomfortable. And Dr. Reyes had greeted her with "Nice medal, Sutton," in the tone he used for everything, which was affectionate underneath the flatness and which she had always understood. A traveling nurse she'd never met had asked quietly if she was the Mara Sutton, and Mara had said she was a Mara Sutton and left it there. And then the work started. A 43-year-old man with crushing chest pain, a 12-year-old with an asthma exacerbation that wasn't responding to the first-line treatment, a construction worker with a degloving injury on his forearm that required the kind of rapid field-clear thinking that Mara did without thinking. She did it. The ER moved the way ERs move, urgently, imperfectly, with equipment that was sometimes where it should be and sometimes not, with decisions made on incomplete information under time pressure, with outcomes that were sometimes what you wanted and sometimes not. She was 4 hours into the shift when she realized she hadn't thought about Tuesday once, not because she'd forgotten, because she was in the place where she made sense, doing the thing that had always been the center of what she was, and the center did not require the periphery to be resolved before it could function. She had always known how to do this, even when she'd been dismissed at it, even when the work had been invisible, even when no one was watching. The work had been real regardless of whether anyone acknowledged it. That had always been true. It was still true. She would go back to the ceremony. She would go back to Tuesday morning, and Dutton at the window, and Marcus in the back seat, and the card in her wallet, and the phone call and the helicopter, and Prentice in the lobby on Sunday morning with 2 cups of coffee. She would go back to it because it had happened, and because it mattered, and because the things that happen to you don't stop being part of you just because you move forward. But she was moving forward. Marcus, 2 weeks later, went back to school on a Tuesday. He carried his backpack carefully on one shoulder instead of 2. The incision was still tender, and he walked into the building with the slightly cautious gait he'd had since the surgery, which the doctor said would resolve fully within the month. Mara watched him from the car. He didn't look back when he went through the doors, which was correct. 9-year-olds don't look back. That's not what they do. They go toward the next thing. And the next thing for Marcus was the hallway and the classroom and whatever Declan's birthday had turned out to involve, and the video game with the dragons that she still didn't entirely understand. She sat in the car for a moment after the doors closed. The street was ordinary. Other parents pulling away, morning light on the sidewalk, the sound of a bus a block over. She thought about what Colbeck had said at the ceremony. It takes too long sometimes, but it does not forget. She thought about what she would say if someone asked her what the week had meant. What 13 minutes on a gridlocked street, a card she'd almost not taken, a helicopter, a piece of footage, 9 complaints, a sealed file, and a ceremony on a cold November morning added up to. She thought she would say, "I was always who I was. I was always doing what I was doing." The acknowledgement didn't create the thing. It just made it visible. And then she would probably say, visibility matters. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't. Being seen is not vanity. Being counted is not weakness. If you have been doing the work in the dark, you are allowed to let someone turn on the light. And maybe she would say one more thing, the thing she'd come to in the dark at 4:18 in the morning with her phone in her hands and a subject line on a screen. The people who dismiss you are not the final word on what you're worth. They never were. They're just the noise you have to move through to get to the work. Move through the noise. Do the work. Keep the card. She put the car in drive. The street opened ahead of her, ordinary and clear, and she drove into the morning.